All right. Good morning, everybody. It's time for us to get started. All right, we're ready to get started on Matthew chapter 8 pretty well. Last Sunday we hadn't quite finished talking about the very conclusion of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus has closed up with a set of warnings talking about there's basically two ways. There's two possible responses to his teaching, which is either to do them or not to do them. And we got to the last one, probably the most famous one, chapter 7, verse 24. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell. And great was the fall of it. All right, and obviously the houses are talking about us. It's talking about our lives. It's we ourselves that will either stand or fall based on what we founded ourselves on. And this is a teaching that I think we all ought to get kind of at a gut level, because we all live in a state that is wholly predicated on the idea that men actually can build their houses on the sand. And we see the results of that all over the place. But we need to take care to understand what the foundation is. So again, Jesus is not just talking about doctrine. As we've been going through these last mornings, we've been saying it's more than doctrine. He is talking about practice. He's talking about works. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. All right, the difference between these two men does not have to do with their hearing. It has to do with their practice, what they do, how they respond to what they have heard. And that's the key component. And so that brings us up to where we're ready to begin at in chapter 8 today. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Righteous Heavenly Father, thank you for blessing us with the good things you've given us today. We thank you especially, Father, for the time that we have had to gather with family and friends and to celebrate your rich blessings on us, your great provision for us. Righteous Father, we pray that you help us to be grateful to you at all times. And we are blessed to have a reminder, Father, of how blessed we are. We pray that you continue to be with us, Father, as we go through and consider the words of your Son. Help us, Father, to be doers of the word and not hearers only. And thank you, Father, for blessing us in your Son, not only through his teaching, but through his sacrifice, the cleansing of sins, and for the hope that we have in the resurrection. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. All right, so we'll talk about the reaction to the Sermon on the Mount in just a second, the last two verses of chapter 7. But we are ready now to get into the next major section of Matthew. So we've said that Matthew is built around 5 discourses, the 5 larger speeches that Jesus gives. The Sermon on the Mount is the first of them. And so now we're ready to get into the next major section, which is going to be focused on Jesus' miracles. And we'll talk about what all of this is about, what his miracles are about, what we're intended to learn from his miracles. And it's going to lead us up to the next major discourse, which is the sending of the 12 in chapter 10. So the chapter is almost entirely going to consist of a speech that Jesus gives to the 12 as he sends them out. And as we go along, we'll see why it is that all of these miracle stories would lead into this speech where Jesus is commissioning the 12 to go out into Israel and preach. So the way that this next section is built up is we've got 3 groups of 3 miracle stories each, interspersed with reactions to Jesus. Now, that doesn't mean that there's 9 miracles performed. As we read through, we'll see that Jesus performs a lot of miracles over the course of this section. But Matthew breaks it up into 3 groups of 3 miracle stories each. And some of them, again, contain more miracles. Like the story of the ruler, who from other gospel accounts we know his name is Jairus. Remember, he comes to Jesus and he says that his daughter has died and he wants Jesus to come and just lay his hand on her so that she will live. And on his way to the ruler's house, as Jesus is traveling to the ruler's house, remember there's this woman who's had an issue of blood for 12 years, who comes and touches the hem of Jesus' garment. And she is healed. And then after that, Jesus arrives at the ruler's house and brings his daughter back to life. It's all one story, but you've got the healing of the woman with the flow of blood kind of nested inside of the story of the resurrection of Jairus' daughter. But Matthew presents it all as one story. So we got 2 miracles, but 1 miracle story. And again, this goes back to Matthew's love of 3s, and it makes things easier to remember for us. So we've got the first group of 3 is going to be the first 22 verses of chapter 8. So that's going to include 3 miracle stories, plus some reaction to Jesus' miracles. Then picking up in verse 23 and going into chapter 9, verse 17, we've got another set of 3 miracle stories with reactions. And then chapter 9, verse 18, through close to the end of chapter 9, we've got a third group of 3 miracle stories. We're going to save any kind of discussion of themes for when we are in the text, because this is a short section. It's just chapters 8, 9, and 10. It's not like the first book, which is a little bit longer, and the discourse was much, much longer. Excuse me. So this should be fairly quick to get through. And we'll start to see the theme pretty much immediately once we get into the text. But the theme is also complex enough that we're gonna need to have these stories in front of us to really get a hand on it, because we can get a sense of where Matthew is going by considering the transition into this book. All right, let's look at those last 2 verses in chapter 7. When Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching. What does the text say astonished them about his teaching? For he was teaching them as one who had authority, and not as their scribes. And when he came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him. All right, so what amazes the crowds about Jesus, at least in his teaching, is his authority. And leading into this next section of the book, we could say that authority is the major theme of this section. But as we read through this, we're going to see that Matthew is going to teach us how to properly understand the nature of Jesus' authority. What does that authority mean? So, like I said, we'll have these stories in front of us as we consider what theme Matthew is trying to get across to us, what the Spirit is trying to teach us in the life of Jesus in this part of the book. Let's see. One other way of getting ourselves into this section of the book is also to see Jesus' descent from the mountain. Jesus coming down from the mountain again brings Moses to mind. And we've mentioned this at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus goes up on the mountain, and he gives all of us his law. And in fact, he's interacting with the law of Moses in a lot of places, right? You've heard that it was said this, I tell you that. Jesus is giving us his will. And now he comes down from the mountain. So Matthew, in a lot of places, is reminding us of Moses and comparing Jesus to Moses. That Jesus is the greater Moses. I want us to remember the final time, because Moses comes down from Mount Sinai a couple of times. The first time he comes down, and he's carrying the tablets of the law. And do y'all remember what happens that first time he comes down from the mountain? Yes, that's the incident with the golden calf. He comes down and discovers that they are worshiping an idol that Aaron has built for them, and he smashes the tablets. The second time that Moses comes down from the mountain, he again comes down with the tablets of the law. And this time, besides not breaking the tablets, this time his face is shining so brightly with the glory of the Lord. Do you remember what happens? He has to wear a veil over his face. The people cannot bear to look at him for the brightness of the Lord's glory. Well, as Jesus descends from the mountain, he's not carrying any tablets, because he himself is the source of the law. He is the law in and of himself. Moses is carrying down a word that he received from the Lord, engraved on stone tablets. Jesus is carrying down the word because he is the Word. He's carrying the will of the Lord because he is the Lord. And although the people can look at him, he's not radiating the way that Moses was. We're going to see over the course of this book that they still couldn't really clearly see him. Over the course of the next 3 chapters, we're going to see a lot of people could not discern clearly who Jesus is, despite the fact that he does carry the glory of God in himself. All right, so that brings us to the first story. We're ready to get into the text itself. Let's begin with, we'll read the first section, the first 22 verses of chapter 8. Then we're going to focus on the first miracle story. When he came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him. And behold, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I will, be clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priests and offer the gift that Moses commanded, for a proof to them. When he had entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward to him, appealing to him, Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly. And he said to him, I will come and heal him. But the centurion replied, Lord, I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, Go, and he goes, and to another, Come, and he comes, and to my servant, Do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he marveled, and said to those who followed him, Truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. I tell you, many will come from east and west and recline at table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And to the centurion Jesus said, Go, let it be done for you as you have believed. And the servant was healed at that very moment. And when Jesus entered Peter's house, he saw his mother-in-law lying sick with fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she rose and began to serve him. And that evening they brought to him many who were oppressed by demons, and he cast out the spirits with a word and healed all who were sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. He took our illnesses and bore our diseases. So that's the three miracle stories: the story of the leper, the story of the centurion, and the story of Peter's mother-in-law and other healings that took place at Peter's house. Then we get some reaction. Now when Jesus saw a crowd around him, he gave orders to go over to the other side. And a scribe came up and said to him, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Another of the disciples said to him, "Lord, let me first go and bury my father." And Jesus said to him, "Follow me, and leave the dead to bury their own dead." All right. So let's begin with the story of the leper. He came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him, and behold, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, if you will, you can make me clean." And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, "I will, be clean." And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priests, and offer the gift that Moses commanded for a proof to them." The leper takes the initiative in this story. He's the one who comes to Jesus and makes his request to Jesus. I want you to pay special attention to the way that the leper treats Jesus. What does he do before he even speaks to Jesus? Yeah, he falls down prostrate. Now, the ESV has translated it knelt. If you're reading out of the King James, it says something much different. The King James translates this worshipped. The leper came to him and worshipped him. Now, this is also an appropriate translation. The word here again just means to prostrate oneself. That is, to fall down on the ground before someone, to do obeisance to someone. And both of these images ought to come to mind, right? Of a person kneeling before a king and of a person bowing to worship God. Because that the Greek word that's translated here gets used in both of those senses. And both of those senses are true of Jesus. He is one to be knelt before as a king, and he is one to be worshipped as God. Which one Matthew means for us to understand? Well, I think there's a reason why Matthew has used this particular word. That both of these images come to our mind. And this leper initiates this conversation with Jesus by falling prostrate before him. Now listen to how the leper addresses Jesus. What does he call Jesus? Lord. This is the first time in Matthew's gospel that a person has referred to Jesus as Lord. In fact, this is only the second time that Jesus has been referred to as Lord by anybody. The other time was in chapter 7. Not everyone that says to me, "Lord, Lord," will enter. And he's referring to himself as Lord. But this is the first time that another person refers to Jesus as Lord. Now, you might have heard, and it's true, that in the first century, the word Lord could simply just be a form of polite address, like the word sir. And that's a use that English maintained for a very long time. It was common to address people as my lord or my lady as a way of being polite. Not necessarily that somebody had some kind of noble peerage or something, but you're just being polite to them. In the case of this leper, though, it is clear that he's not merely being polite to Jesus. He's not just saying sir, because he's prostrating himself before Jesus. Right, he means much more by Lord than merely sir here. He means Lord in the fuller sense of the word. Someone who is his actual master, someone who is in a position over him. That's what he opens with. Falling down prostrate, calling Jesus Lord. And then we get his actual address. Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. So according to the leper, what does his cleansing depend on? The will of Jesus. That is what Jesus wants. That if you want it to be, you can make me clean. And now for us to understand where Matthew is going with all of these miracle stories in general, and to understand the overall theme of this book, this section of Matthew, it is very important for us to understand what is happening with the leper in this story. And this has to do with the way that we understand the miracles of Jesus. They are not just demonstrations of power. Right? At least we should understand that for Jesus, power is not merely a question of ability. Like, does he have the capacity or the strength to do miracles? That's not all that's going on here. Right? At points later, this will be a topic of discussion. Is Jesus capable of doing this, that, or the other thing? But at no point in this exchange is it ever questioned whether or not Jesus is able to cleanse the leper. Like if he has the capacity. For now, the question is his will. What he desires to happen. And we have a word for a Lord's will. It is his authority. And that's why we started with the last couple of verses of chapter 8. Matthew is transitioning us into these miracle stories. The crowds are astonished at Jesus' teaching because he's teaching them as one who had authority. Well, then he goes on. In fact, who knows whether this leper at the foot of the mountain could hear Jesus' teaching from the mountain? Probably so. That's the reason why Jesus is up on the mountain, so people can hear him. These people are astonished at his authority, and now the leper comes up to him and recognizes his authority. And that's what his miracles are first and foremost about. And we'll get into that after. Jason, you've got a comment or a question?
Yeah, the authority that he's talking about is he doesn't address him as like an earthly king. Right? When he says, you are Lord and you can do this thing if you want, he's not talking about sending someone to go this way or that way, like the centurion talks about. Right. He's talking about him having the authority to completely change a person's body.
Yes.
Right. To heal them of something at the time did not have you couldn't just take an antibiotic, go down to the local CVS and then you're straight away fixed again.
Yep.
So he addresses him obviously as Lord in like a godly sense, right?
Religious in a divine sense, yeah.
And you see, and people often ask the question, where do you see where Jesus, says he's God, and we see this. And when you think of previous examples where someone kneels before an angel of the Lord, the angel immediately has a different responance.
Yep. What do the angels always say? Yep.
Yeah, get up. Do not worship me. Jesus doesn't do that here. Right? So you see that Jesus is straight away here. We see the difference between him and a messenger of God, which is what people often try to make Jesus out to be that don't believe in his deity.
Yes.
So he's being addressed not as an earthly Lord here, but as a Lord in a religious sense. And when knelt before and worshipped, he does not tell that person to get up.
Yes.
He shows his authority and heals them.
Yes. Yeah, and there are lots of instances like this. Yeah, can you imagine coming away from this story thinking Jesus doesn't think himself to be God, or that Jesus doesn't identify as some kind of divinity, that he doesn't feel comfortable being worshipped as God? Now, you come away from this story, there's a reason why the first charge that the authorities in Jerusalem try to pin on Jesus is blasphemy. And in fact, we're going to see it in this book. I forget if it's in the second or third group of miracle stories, we have the story of the paralytic. And remember what Jesus says to him. He doesn't just say, first off, get up and be healed and walk. What's he say first? Yeah, your sins are forgiven you. And remember everybody else's reaction there. Like, what on earth is this guy saying? It sounds like blasphemy, because who has the authority to forgive sins? God alone. And Jesus, and this is taking us, we're getting ahead of Matthew's story a bit here. But this is where Matthew is going with us. Because why does Jesus heal the paralytic? So that you can know that the Son of Man has the authority to forgive sins. So that's where we're going with this. But it begins here. All right, Wayne.
Something else going on here too, as you brought up before. Moses had to go up into the mountain to meet God. Here's God coming down from the mountain.
Yeah, that's a good angle to this.
And when he came down, when Moses came down, what were the people doing? They were bowing to an idol. Here God comes down from the mountain, and what happens?
The leper bows to him.
The leper bows to him, the true God. So there's a play there that Matthew wants us to pick up.
Those are some good connections. Yeah, because and we'll talk more about this in just a minute. But one of the things that Jesus does with this leper is he stretches out his hand and he touches him. Well, remember, back at Sinai, whenever whenever God appears to Moses on the mountain, what's the law concerning the mountain? Don't touch it. If you touch it, you die. Anything that touches it has to be put to death from a distance, right? Like shot with an arrow or stoned or something. Because you are not allowed to touch the place. You're not allowed to touch the thing or the person who has touched the place where God has come down to meet Moses. And yet here you have the Son of God, right? True God in himself, touching a man. All right, we'll say more about the touch in just a minute. All right, but I want us to come back to this issue of authority. The miracles of Jesus are first and foremost about displaying his authority. The miracle stories of this book are going to build on this idea. And like we said, power will come into this picture later on, because power is part of authority. But we must understand that the bigger picture here is that these miracles establish Jesus' authority. In the very first verse of Matthew, who does Matthew tell us that Jesus is? He's the Son of David. The whole opening of the book is establishing that he is Son of David, which makes Jesus a king. He's just spoken at length about his kingdom, and he'll speak of it again. And remember, he is going to be crucified under what sign? This is Jesus, King of the Jews. This is all about Jesus' authority. And his answer to the leper confirms that this is about his authority. He doesn't say, I'm able. What does he say? I will. Yeah. In other words, I will it. I decree it, we might say. Be cleansed, or be clean. It is the Lord's will for this man to be clean. So he issues an order. It's an imperative, be clean. And you look at what happens. Immediately his leprosy was cleansed. Jesus speaks, and the leper's body listens. The leprosy listens. And this begins to get us to the nature of divine authority, the authority that Jesus bears. Because sometimes when we talk about authority, we ought to be careful not to start with an impoverished view of what authority is. Sometimes we kind of just cut to the end of the biblical discussion about authority and just get to like practical response and ignore everything that comes before it. The practical response of authority is, if God says do something, do it, right? We have to do this, that, and the other thing because God says so. And we don't get to change God's rules because He made the rules. He has authority. We got to be careful and not to get ahead of ourselves, because it helps us to remember the beginning of divine authority. Think of it this way. How was the universe created? You go back to Genesis 1. How does God create the universe? He speaks it. He literally says, "Let there be this." He just says it out. He issues a command. And it happens. He gives commands to the universe, and that's how everything comes to be. The universe, everything is created by God's authority. It's not merely a matter of power, like capacity, ability. It's a matter of authority. And we'll be fleshing this out as we go along, but one thing to bear in mind, again, is that divine authority is not just a matter of, all right, well, Jesus says this, you have to do it. It very much does mean that. If Jesus tells you something, you do have to do it. What I mean is that the authority of Jesus covers more than just our practical response to His commands. Authority is how we understand Jesus' commands to fit together with His promises, because they are both functions of His authority. All right, when Jesus says to do this, that, or the other thing, when He says, you've heard it said, this, that, or the other thing, but I tell you, right? Don't even look at a woman with lustful intent, right? Don't even be angry with your brother. That authority is connected to the same authority that allows Him to say, "I will be clean." It's impossible to have one of those things without the other. We can't just take part of Jesus' authority and reject the rest. Right? We can't say, well, I'll take the promises and the blessings, but I'd rather not have the obligations or the prohibitions, because those flow from the same thing. Those are both functions of His authority. If you want the promises and the blessings, you want God's authority. So you can't turn around and then say, well, actually, I don't want God's authority. It doesn't work that way. If you reject one part of God's authority, you're rejecting all of His authority. Right? To put it another way, James tells us that the person who transgresses on a single point transgresses what? The whole law. If you reject God's authority in one way, you're rejecting His authority every way. And it's not just a matter of saying, well, if you do this thing wrong, it's as if you were guilty of everything. It's if you reject God's authority to do His will, you are also rejecting His authority to heal and to bless and to provide, to do all of the great things that Jesus is displaying in these miracles. Jason?
Today's probably the most common form of idolatry with the Lord, is that people have this cherry picker buffet style approach to Jesus' authority and the laws. They want to kind of, well, I'll take some of this and I'll take some of that. No, I don't want this. And they think that they can just pick out and have anything that they want, and then reject all the things that they think are no good. Right? So they heap themselves up some God that is not the God of the Bible. They heap before them a Jesus that is not the Jesus that we read about here. Yeah. Jesus says just to love, but then they leave out the part of chastisement. They leave out the other parts of severity and all of these other things that are just not convenient for them. And so it's not something that started with today's generation. We see that it's all the way back, and
it's always been there.
Yeah, we'll read about it within the next few verses and chapters really coming up, where people want just one part of God, and that's the goodness, but they want to leave out the law, and they want to leave out the works, and they want to leave out the rest of the things because it's not super convenient. It requires me to do more than just receive. And that's really what people want. They just want a whole lot of receive, but not a lot of give.
Yes. Yeah, because God's authority puts us under obligation. And we want to have the blessings without the obligation. So we'll see Matthew flesh this out as we go along, but this is the kind of thing that we need to have in our minds as we go through these miracle stories. That this is about Jesus' authority, and the way that authority plays out in his healing, and in other ways as well. So again, we'll get there when we get there. The discussion of authority in the story continues after the healing. When Jesus tells the healed man to present himself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded. There are a couple of things going on here. But most pertinent to our understanding of this section of Matthew is that Jesus is continuing in authority. The law of Moses, well, first off, he's respecting the authority of his Father. Because the law of Moses was the will of the Father as it was known to Israel at that time. This is one thing that we note about Jesus' ministry, that during his life, even though he had come to supersede and replace the law of Moses, during his life, he perfectly obeyed the law of Moses. And we go back to what he said in the Sermon on the Mount about whoever relaxes the least of these commandments is, well, what's their status? Least in the kingdom. Here we see that Jesus is not relaxing the commandments. What happens whenever somebody is healed from leprosy under the law? Well, they have to be inspected by the priest. The priest has to give them the okay, basically sign off that they have been healed, and they are allowed to re-enter society. And that's another part of what this commandment is about. This is the leper's means of re-entering society. The priest is going to be able to see that this man has been healed, and now it's going to be official that this man is no longer unclean, and he doesn't have to go around saying, unclean, unclean, to let people get away from him. Yes, he has to make the sacrifices. So he is respecting the Father's authority with this. The other thing that's going on here is that Jesus he's concerned with the type of testimony that will come about from this miracle. Notice he says, "See that you say nothing to anyone." He tells this healed man, don't tell anybody about this, except for, obviously, the priest. He's the one who is to hear the man's testimony. Why the priest? It's a matter of authority. But this is something that we should file away in the backs of our minds for later on in the gospel, once we get to Jesus' trials and crucifixion. Because who's responsible for having Jesus arrested? Who tries him for blasphemy? It's the priests. The chief priests and the scribes in Jerusalem are the ones responsible for this. And by the time that happens, they will have received the testimony concerning Jesus Christ. Right? They'll have seen a leper who comes to one of them with the sacrifice that Moses commanded. This guy who's been a leper but is now clean. So how did you get clean? What happened? Well, let me tell you about this guy, Jesus. I met this man, Jesus, and he healed me. Right, but in other words, by the time that we get to Jesus' trials, there's no excuse for the priests who have him on trial. All right, in the last couple of minutes here, I want us to circle back to something else important that happens in this scene. So we mentioned earlier, Jesus shows the leper immediate mercy by touching him. Now, we read the whole first section of this book. The next story that we're going to read is the story of the centurion. And that story shows us that Jesus does not have to reach out and touch someone to heal them. The centurion says, I'm not worthy to have you under my roof. You just say the word and it'll happen. And that's what Jesus does. He says, go, let it be done for you as you have believed. He doesn't go to the centurion's house. He doesn't even have to physically be present for this healing to occur. But with this leper before him, not only does he say, I will be clean, but before he even does that, we read, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him. Now, why is it significant that Jesus reached out and touched this person, do you think? What's important about Jesus' reaching out and touching this leper? Oh, go ahead, Dennis.
So touching a leper, if Jesus did not have the power to heal him in that instant, then touching him would have made himself unclean.
Yes. Since we've mentioned it, I want us to go ahead and follow that thread for a bit. Because according to the law, what is more likely to rub off on you? Holiness or uncleanness? It's uncleanness by a mile. Right? There are occasions where the law talks about holiness being transferred to people through touching certain holy things. There are certain times when the altar's been consecrated that touching the altar can make a person holy. There are a few other examples in the law as well, but uncleanness is far and away the more contagious thing according to the law. At least 9 times out of 10, it's almost always the case that when a holy thing and an unclean thing come into contact with one another, which way does the influence go? It's almost always the case that the holy thing gets defiled by the unclean thing. Not the other way around. And we look at what Jesus has just done. The Holy Son of God touches one of the most viscerally unclean types of people imaginable. And rather than the holy becoming unclean, the unclean is cleansed. Jesus' holiness is enough to deal with the leper's uncleanness. And the other thing that Jesus is doing here is he's showing compassion. Right? The healing itself obviously is compassionate. But he's showing compassion that goes beyond even just the healing. He does something for this leper that basically no one other than other lepers would have done for him. And who knows how long this man has had leprosy. We don't know this guy's story. But it's entirely possible that this man has gone years and years and years without experiencing the touch of another human being. And now Jesus reaches out and touches this man before healing him. All right, that wraps us up for this morning. We will, Lord willing, on Thursday, consider the faith of the centurion and perhaps even finish out this first triad. Thank you so much for your kind attention and your questions and comments.